ladies and gentlemen.
Live from the van down by the river.
Starring
Mike Murray and
Nicole.
Rovine.
This
Is
SNL.
SNL
By the numbers.
numbers.
Hello and welcome everyone to By the Numbers SNL Season 48, Episode 2. My name is Nicole Rovine and I am joined by our stats guru, Mike Murray. We are a dynamic duo today. It is just the two of us and we're gonna do this. We're gonna do it. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing great. Had a great long weekend up in New Hampshire. I just watched the episode last night, did the stats. I don't think I've ever watched an episode for the first time and done stats at the same time. But it was funny because I just pick a character, run with them, rewind, keep doing, it was kind of a funny process. But
Yeah.
it was great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. I like this weather we're in. I love October. I think September might be my favorite month, but I love October. I've been on the topic of stats. My office, I use this obsessive transportation Excel model that I'm building where I track every element of my journey to and from work. So I track how long it takes me to walk from the subway. I track how long it takes me whether I take one subway route or another subway route. And then I calculate the standard deviation of each part of it and, which elements can I optimize more effectively and all that stuff. And it's kind of amazing. And I feel like I am amazing in the sense of crazy and actually a huge waste of time, but it's fun. It's like my break, it feels like just a stress relief to be like plugging numbers obsessively. And, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's what people don't realize about the spreadsheets is it's actually really relaxing. It's not a ton of work.
Yeah, it is. It becomes
your
more
brain
so,
feels
too.
happy.
And it's so satisfying too, because if there's something I don't know how to do when I'm trying to build an unnecessarily complicated Excel model, there's always a way to do whatever it is you want to do, even if it's something you've never seen done before. You can always figure it out or research it or Reddit. I feel like Reddit is amazing for Excel. People are so generous too. Huge, this is very besides the point, but that's just what I've been up to is my massive Excel model for my transportation and optimizing my life because I am very busy, as we all are. Mike is far busier than I am, though. You're very busy.
Well, we always say in our group chats, all data is good data. And I think that's a pretty good motto for this show because some data is more fun than others, but all data can be used.
No, it's so true because, every element of this transportation spreadsheet, I can find a way to blow it up and make it really cool and have meaning and value. So it's so cool. It's so true. Anyways, so we're here for episode 2. We have a lot to talk about, from comparing the premiere with Miles Teller and Kendrick Lamar to episode 2 of the season with Brendan Gleeson and WILLOW. It was a really fun episode. A lot happened on the internet after the fact. It was a very kind of a frenzy of an episode, but we are going to kind of wash that away a little bit here. And we're going to do what we do best and really boil it down to the numbers and see what the numbers say. And then, make our kind of calls from there based on that. So what would be your kind of hot take from episode 2, from a numbers perspective and from an all-encompassing perspective?
I think one thing that stood out to me, which was a benefit because I had a short window to get these stats done, was it was like the episode had a lot of open space in it. And I was looking at previous episodes, because if I take all the screen time that I collect for our show and I add them all together, it's kind of like how much time is a person on the screen, right? So if you have 3 people on the screen at the same time, those will all be concurrent numbers running together. And it reminded me, not the episode itself, but the data point of view. The last episode that was this low was the Will Forte episode, which was a pretty weird vibe episode. This one felt a lot more fun, but that was an episode that had a lot of room in it, fewer people and sketches, and it made my job way easier. So I see a question in the chat about if it positively or adversely affected my enjoyment. I was pretty just focused on getting it done, but it was, usually when I do the stats, I've already seen the episode, so I know like everything that's coming. So it was kind of fun to laugh along with my stopwatch.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was looking at that episode. Also, I love seeing Irish host. Need more Irish hosts.
Yeah.
That
That representation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
like
so
to see the
true.
representation. Like to
Yeah.
hear that familiar accent.
Oh yeah. Yep. I agree. I think if there were an episode that we could all join forces and write a PhD on, a dissertation on, that would be the word I was looking for, or like any sort of massive, massive project of taking one episode and turning it into a whole thing, I think the Will Forte one might be the one because of all of the insanity around just the numbers of it. Because a point that was made, I believe it was John who said this back a few months ago when the episode aired, but probably 80% of that episode, you could isolate sketches and say this could have happened 12 years ago and no one in this sketch wasn't around 12 years ago, or this sketch would happen right now and no one who was on the show 12 years ago is on it. And it was so split like that, and it was just fascinating to analyze. I feel like that's one what we love to come back to
Right.
reference.
I
It's
wouldn't
fun.
mind oral history on that episode from the people who were there. Just because
Mhm.
was it like a negative atmosphere or was it really fun and they just were going for something that didn't play to the live audience? But yeah, just for context, last week's Mile Teller episode, if you add up everyone's screen time, the whole episode comes up to like 2 hours, 2 minutes, where this episode was like an hour 38. So a pretty big drop off. But I was going back through last season and it's like they're all around 2 hours, hour 45, except that Will Forte one, which is an hour and a half. So like that's a lot less bodies on screen and more, less people coming in and out.
Yeah. And you know what I noticed this week, which we'll get into as I was making the chart from your data, is the pre-tapes had that vibe. The pre-tapes both had very few people this week. Each there are two pre-tapes that went to the live show, and they both had very few people, which was kind of cool because I feel like each one really cultivated its own vibe in that sort of way, which I liked. But I think let's just dive into it, and we'll talk about how all of these comments we're making, how they actually play into the data. So
yeah, let's debut the screen time. Do you
let's
have
do
the
it.
results of our poll?
I do. I will kind of get into that as we go. So we're going to talk about how many people said who they thought would have the most screen time this week, and it was interesting. So we had a lot of different kind of guesses. We had a lot of people said Heidi, a lot of people said Bowen, and this again is excluding the host because we have to exclude the host, knowing that the host pretty much always gets the most screen time. So yeah, we had Heidi, Bowen. Let me pull this up and I will be more exact for you. Hang on just a second. You want to tell a story while I do this?
Was anyone that you thought when you watched was on the screen the most? Like, did you have a take?
Yeah, I thought Heidi actually, and spoiler alert, I was incorrect. But I felt like Heidi was really had a really strong screen presence this week, and especially compared to last week where I felt like she was more of a utility player. This week I feel like her roles were more, they popped more. So I thought Heidi, and I was wrong. What would you have thought? Or you were taking down the data as you did it, as you watched it. So I guess you didn't have a take first.
Yeah, I guess my guess would have been Colin Jost first time through without looking at the totals, just because it wasn't as long update as last week with the 3 spots, but it was a pretty heavy Jost episode. Most time for Jost since like mid of last season. Most screen time for Jost. So I would have guessed him, but actually someone did pass him, or maybe a few.
Indeed. Okay,
just
so
one.
Yep. So for who our audience thought had the most screen time, it was Bowen Yang was in first place for who we thought, followed by Heidi Gardner, followed by Ego Wodum, followed by Colin Jost, and then Mikey Day. So that was what our audience thought, and it was pretty close. It was pretty close. Let me pull this up.
Yeah, people forget about Jost and Shay, but they get extended close-ups.
Here we go. The big moment. The big reveal. All right. You want to read this one out as I put it up?
Sure, you have it.
Yes, I do.
All right, here we go. Season 48, episode 2, screen time. Brendan Gleeson with 21 minutes, 22 seconds, which is, I think, a little higher than I would have guessed. Bowen Yang with a career high SNL screen time for his career, that is 9 minutes, 43 seconds. So last week, I mentioned that Nicole had texted right after the episode, like, that's going to be a career high for Bowen. And I think everyone agreed, like, he just seemed like he was all over the place last week. And I was like, oh, it's like ended up being his fourth, whatever. This week, we'll get into it with the power rankings, but like, it didn't seem like that, but it shows the power of the cold open. Colin Jost, number 2 for Cass, that is 7 minutes, 7 seconds. Ego Wodum after him, 6:51. Dismukes, 6:15. Mikey Day, 6 minutes, 2 seconds. Chloe Feynman, 5 minutes, 31. Willow, the musical guest, 5.5 minutes. Sarah Sherman, 4 minutes, 34. Heidi Gardner, 4 minutes, 5. Marcelo, with obviously his career high as well, episode 2 of his career, 3 minutes, 58 seconds. Michael Longfellow, 3 minutes, 8. Keenan, 2:43. Guest, Colin Farrell, 2:37. Molly Kearney, 2:18. Devin Walker, 2:10. Michael Che with a low 1:48 in contrast to Joe's 7:7. JAJ at 1:40. And then Martin Hurley, 1:34. John and Ben from PDD, 1:31 each. Steve Higgins, 19 seconds. And Punky Johnson at 9 seconds. What do you think, Nicole?
There's a lot here. I mean, first of all, yeah, Bowen career high is huge. To think that last episode was almost his career high. I guess now that episode has been bumped down to his 4th career high episode, because last week was his 3rd. So now this one is it. I just feel like he's on the rise. I feel like he could hypothetically break this record every week. I feel like there's no reason he won't do that, which I'm excited about always. So that's great to see. I mean, of course, Punky is unfortunate to see. I wish that she had gotten more screen time, especially since it was such an amazing episode for all 4 rookies. I feel like it was really, like, other than Punky, it felt like one of the more equitable episodes in recent memory, honestly. So for one person to kind of stand out in that way was not great. I didn't love that. But and then of course
for
Steve
Punky
Higgins.
and her short SNL career so far, she's had 12 episodes with 12 seconds or less. A lot of those were shutouts, but if you don't include those, there's 4 that's been 12 or less. So it's always a little sad when you're in the building and you're at the, you're there all week, and then it's like you get a quick moment. But contrast, 9 seconds screen time, but you get to say live from New York in that 9 seconds, which is fun.
That's true. It was a very optimized 9 seconds, I suppose. But yeah, also just for anyone tuning in for the first time, or if you have had this question and we haven't addressed it, Steve Higgins does voiceovers pretty much every episode. He does it for pre-tapes. He does it for live sketches. He does it for cold opens. He is low-key, like, all over the episode. Usually, I'd say his average is about 2 appearances per show, right, Mike?
Yeah, for sure. Like, 1
Yeah.
or 2 an episode. Like, it's
Yeah,
rare that Steve Higgins does not speak during a show.
exactly. And in this case, his son had more screen time than him, but they are both on the board. That's the only father-son duo on the board. Although Brendan Gleeson and his son, I feel, perhaps almost made the board. His son was in the building, but he was not in the show. But
He was in the
speaking
building?
of, I believe he was in the building. Yeah.
Yeah, did he
I think
mention him in the
audience.
monologue?
I don't think so. I don't think he did. Maybe he mentioned it briefly, but
Maybe if Brendan
not
Gleeson
much.
was a musical guest, his son would have introed him.
Yeah, that would have been cute. Yeah,
We
but
needed
on the
more,
topic
if we
of
needed more mandolin tuning involved.
right, yes. But so on the topic of cameos, I would just point out Colin Farrell had definitely one of the strongest. I mean, as far as non-former cast member cameos, like when Kristen Wiig came in for the Forte episode, she was all over the map. But I feel like as far as he's a one-time host. He hosted many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, and he had two sketch appearances in the cold open and in a sketch and in the headshot sketch, and I think he was really memorable in both. And he is, I mean, to be right behind Kenan Thompson on the board, like you have to be doing great, So that was cool. I feel like he kind of left something to be desired, though. I know a lot of people were saying online that they want him to host again, and it's always fun. I think cameos in that type of instance, it is sort of like an audition to host again. If you create a lot of buzz, it's fun to hear that. And so maybe another like analysis we'll do is tracking hosts who had recent cameos on the show and seeing like how they performed in that cameo just by the numbers. So like, is it really common that the more screen time someone had in their cameo, were they more likely statistically to then host, somewhere between 3 and 12 months later? Whereas maybe there isn't a correlation. Maybe people who have 2 seconds of a cameo are equally as likely to host within the year.
Yeah, I
That'd
feel
be
like there's
fun.
definitely there's a correlation for sure about like popping up in the show and then getting invited back to host. I mean, with like a Colin Farrell or Peyton Manning, like they hosted like a long time ago and then come back, so they're like they're friends of the show already. But even with like Megan Thee Stallion, like pops up in a sketch, and now we're gonna see her this week. Like Jason Momoa, like he popped up in the Chance the Rapper episode, like things like that. And then you host pretty soon after that, or Timothy Chalamet hosting and then being like right back for the Carey Mulligan Kid Cudi episode.
Yeah. Also, Timothy is such an interesting example because he is referenced so much on the show. There was one episode last spring where his name was said 4 different times, I think, in the episode, and he was not on it. It was
we were compiling a Timothy Chalamet. I was like, I think it's like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Timothy Chalamet of the most name drops of like the COVID era on SNL, which is strange.
It was strange, but it was so funny.
He's also
And
a friend of Baby Yoda's, so that's why he was mentioned there.
right.
He's in
Exactly.
his posse.
Exactly. All right. Anything else you want to point out from here before we move on to the next thing?
Just that it was a rare low Keenan night. So whether that I don't know if people missed Keenan or he had enough sprinkled in there. I mean, he had the button on the rookie pre-tape, which was fun, and he kind of had a quick punchline in the Sarah sketch at the end of the night. So like Keenan definitely had his little moments. So maybe he didn't feel like he wasn't there much, but that's definitely low for Keenan. I had in my notes that's the lowest screen time total like since early last year for Keenan.
Wow, yeah. And also, I feel like he was as present to me as a viewer. I feel like he left as much of an impact as the week prior, which is interesting because he did have more of those quick scene steely moments this episode, whereas I guess he just had more pure screen time last episode. He was in the kind of the heart and the like the gut of a sketch more often. But I feel like I like when Keenan is utilized more in this way, where he like comes in at the end of a sketch and he, that's so Keenan to me. So I mean, he's lower on the leaderboard, but I feel like he left as much of an impact. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like Keenan's like the panic button. I mean, I think even writers have said that like when in doubt, like cut to a Keenan shot, just because it might be a cheap laugh, but it's a solid expected laugh, and like you can't go wrong. But yeah, he had 11-13 last week and now 243, so that's definitely the biggest drop off. Either way for a cast member. So yeah,
Right.
But yeah, I agree though. I mean, we mentioned last week on the show that Keenan was not in the cold open last week, and that was even joked about. So it's like usually if you lead the cast in screen time, it means that you had a good cold open. Look at Bowen here. Had just one sketch that had a ton of time. So it was funny to have Keenan not there and lead. But yeah, let's move on to power ranking, which is well, you pull it up. So now we have 2 episodes to go on. So power ranking is a cumulative thing, not just one show. So we just average it every week to see. That's why it's called a power ranking, because they move up and down week to week. And just for some context, as we're early on in the season, I threw in last season's first 2 episodes just so you could see how different it is. And yeah, Nicole, I guess I'll let you, what your opinions are on the difference, but then we'll get into the actual numbers.
Yeah. So just to confirm the number, this is the first, how many episodes of each season?
2.
The first 2, exactly. Okay. So yeah, I mean, the thing that sticks out is JJ's premiere episode last year was like, from a power rankings perspective, with all that time in the cold open, like unbelievable. So doesn't surprise me to see that the combination of them, the average, he is still, ways ahead of these people who've been there for so many years. Like to see 80 Bryant two below him, and Cecily and Pete and all these people are like, a solid couple points behind this guy who has been there for 2 weeks, was like one of the most interesting data moments in the show's history, for sure.
And
So
his
that's
his
crazy.
career high to this day is his debut.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah,
Which is
I
a
mean,
stat that, like you look at, when we talk about rookies last week, but like you look at a Luke Null who gets 0 seconds in his debut, and JAJ has never had a better episode.
right. Yeah, that's very true. So that, I mean, completely stands out. Also, I mean, okay, something I have to point out that I'm not loving about 48 is the gender disparity. The top 4 are all men, which, I mean, it's all great people, all people I love to see at the top. But I do feel, especially with 2 men back-to-back hosts, and we've done a lot of analyses of how having a male host impacts, women's time and all that stuff, and how women hosts impact men's time. But I don't love that. I hope that with Meg Thee Stallion we get, Heidi, I feel like could, if she moves up a few points, she could get into that top 3, top 4. Chloe too, Ego. I mean, they're all pretty close up there. So that's what stands out to me, is I really want to see some more women this season. I think it's yeah. So those are just a few things that stand out to me. Do you wanna read for our audio listeners? Do you want to read out 47, and then I'll read out 48?
I think we can just read out 48. If you have
Sure.
any, differences you want to point out, then do that. But with 48, Bowen's at the top of the cast. Again, this is 2 episode average. We have Bowen Yang about 131, Keenan 108, Mikey Day 102, Andrew 96, Heidi 91.5, Chloe about 90, Ego 88, Colin 79, JJ 60, Michael Longfellow 58.6, Michael Che 54.5, Sarah 44.6, Marcelo 42.3, Devin 33.2, Punky about 31, and Molly about 28. And just as a reminder, this number that I just read out is a combo of appearances and screen time that are weighted together in a big math equation that produces one number. So we don't have to have the deceptive screen time number always dominate who hosts Weekend Update or who's in the cold open. It takes into consideration recurring roles and saying live from New York and, when you appear in SNL, all that stuff. So that's what the number means. So I think for me, standing out is that Bowen had a really slow start last year. For a third-year cast member, was at a 9.25 at this time last year, and now he's like couldn't be higher. He's 22 points ahead of Keenan. So that's the most standout. What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think that he didn't have a lot of momentum right at the beginning of last season, especially coming off of his prior spring, because that's when the Iceberg debuted. And I know I talked last week about how I liked to not talk so much about the Iceberg, but I do think that given that was really the moment that put him on the map on the show, it is surprising that he had a slower start right after that, after the momentum of it. So also with the Emmy nomination, he had that last year as well. So it is surprising from the numbers that it was a slower start. But this year, the same cannot be true at all. He is top of the charts. He's like, and really has a pretty steep, advantage over number 2, Mr. Kenan Thompson himself. Yeah, Bowen has about 22 plus points, 22.5 points on Kenan. So that's one of the bigger, maybe even the biggest jump on this entire, that's the biggest difference on this entire season 48, episodes 1 and 2 cumulative average power rankings is between number 1 and number 2. So Bowen is, by all metrics, combining everything that Mike does, you can really say conclusively that he's the star of the show right now.
Yeah, and just for context, on last season, he was there both nights. He had a sketch cut with Kim Kardashian that didn't make it to the live show, but he was in the Owen Wilson episode. He was in the school board sketch that everybody was in, and then he was the genie in Jasmine Aladdin, which I think now is a pretty notorious SNL sketch. One of the most watched and most referenced. And that was it. So his he had. Yeah, so he had one each in those first 2, and then he blew up in the Rami Malek episode with the Oompa Loompa, the mattress store. Played George Takei in the celeb school game show, and played in the Bug Assembly, first of maybe many Bowen Bug appearances.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where Bowen's at. So I do like the stats for that reason, just because sometimes you forget. You can't remember every appearance. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a full list of them all, but the stats will tell you, exactly what was going on at that time. And of course, Kate was not in the cast for 7 shows, so until she showed back up. So yeah, I guess you can look across from these 2 charts and try to look if anyone's in the same spot. Do you see anyone that's like in a similar spot?
I mean, Heidi feels, especially when you take she's at number 5 this year, and she was at 6 last year, but there were more people last year. So she was, if you kind of average out proportionately, I'd say pretty much the same spot. So Heidi feels around the same, which I guess is surprising because she had an amazing fall compared to her spring in many ways, because she did have a lot of the roles that later went to Kate in the spring, which I think just did happen. And it was really, she had a lot of momentum. And then I think she is having that again now. But also the stats kind of make it seem like her year last year and her year this year are the same, which is interesting because I guess they are pretty similar. However, I guess it was just I think it's popping in a different way this year as it did last year. I feel like the comparison of, it feels kind of more specific was more last year, or like certain people aren't here, whereas now it feels like, it's a new era. Heidi is stepping into, being one of the senior cast members, being one of the stars of the show, and this is something that is going to become a truth and a norm. So I feel like she has more momentum that is going upward this season, because that's the direction it's heading in. Whereas last year was a little bit more like in limbo. But yeah, I mean, her season 47 at this time, as of 2 episodes, was 69.37. And again, she was in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th place on a bigger cast last year. And then this year she's at 91.50, and that's 5th place. So higher, but it should also be noted that all of these are way higher this year. Like everyone has a higher power ranking. So JAJ, his power ranking last year at the top of the chart was 81.43. Bowen this year at the top is 130.65. And then even again, Kenan at number 2 is 108.1 this year. Last year, Ego was number 2, and she was 77.99. So truly, like, it feels like everyone is getting more time this year than people got last year, which what do you think about that, Mike, and the reasons behind that?
Yeah, that was my last was gonna be my last point before we move on from the power rankings is that everyone's pretty boosted on the chart. So if there's any, if someone's not high on the season so far, then please let me know. But I mean, every year you might have some optimistic energy, but if you're, feeling what they're doing this season and you're like feeling good about the cast, I think it's just because everyone's being used more. It's not as bloated. I mean, the power ranking considers everything from the cast size. So, you can go back to season 1 with 7 cast members and the scores will be comparable to today, even if with 21 cast members last year. But yeah, they're higher for a reason. I think just you're seeing the usage more. And I mean, thinking about the guests we've had, we just talked about Colin Farrell last week with Miles Teller. Like we're not seeing the, long political cold openings that have guest stars in them that SNL was pretty derided for in the Alec Baldwin Trump era. So that will definitely be a part of it. And maybe we'll see the scores go down as the midterm shows up and we have longer cold opens and longer weekend updates. But we're seeing more sketches and more cast usage for longer periods of time. So yeah, I think we should move on and talk about one of my favorite topics that we never talk about.
Here we go.
So a lot of times, because we're talking about screen time and power rankings on the show every week, and for 3 seasons now, we're always talking about how the cold open works and how it's such a huge part of SNL history and a way to become a star. Like Kate McKinnon was like a huge cold open star, and Beck Bennett, and now JAJ is. We'll talk about maybe that more a little later, but one cool thing about SNL is like the terminology of the cold opening and the monologue and the first sketch and weekend update. And then I love the colloquialism of the 10-1. And so the 10-1 I just define for this metric as a live sketch that serves as the final segment of the show. So it's called 10-1 because it usually airs between 12:50 and 1, then followed by the good nights. So I was like, I want to look at all the 10-1s we've seen over the past few years. I capped it at the last 65 episodes. I mean, I also have to get a big sample size. So over the last 65 episodes, we've had 42 10-1 sketches. We don't always get one. Sometimes they end with a musical performance or a pre-tape. That can depend on wardrobe. It can depend on what gets cut. But 10-1s also are kind of notorious for being goofy, for showcasing some humor that might not be for everyone, which is why I think they're fun to talk about. And I thought with that difference in humor, that also could illustrate maybe difference in kind of like an alt comedy a little bit in the cast. Like maybe Kate McKinnon wouldn't be in the cold open. Wouldn't be in the 10-1s as much as the cold opens, but someone else will. So what I did was take their screen time over the last 65 episodes and then how much of that screen time had occurred during the a 10-1 sketch and what percentage that is. So you want to read off the results at least a little bit, maybe like the top 5?
Yeah, and then which metric?
They're sorted by their percentage. So obviously, we have like people like Beck who are not in this season or last, but but it was in a ton of episodes and ton of screen time. And then we have I left out the rookies because it's only been 2 episodes. But so these are sorted by the highest percentage of their screen time occurring during the 10-1 sketch.
Yep. Okay. So as Eric said in the chat, it is a metric designed to put Aristotle on top. Exactly. I guess that is, if you had said, what is a way we can give Aristotle some justice, a good stat that would make him at the top? This is probably the stat that would make that happen. I really thought this would be the one. So I'm going to read these off. So at number 1 is Aristotle Atari at, again, 10-1 percentage. And that, one second. Here we go. And that is 23.67%. Then we have Sarah Sherman, 18.84%. And we just saw some 10-1 action from her. So this, that was her big moment this past episode. So that feels nice to see it right up there. Then we have Andrew Dismukes, 14.95. Ego Wodum, 11.25. Punky Johnson, 10.56. Heidi Gardner, 9.09. 80 Bryant, 8.68. Beck Bennett, 8.55. Melissa Villasenor, 7.38. Keenan Thompson, 7.36. Cecily Strong, 7.02. Lauren Holt, 6.93. Alex Moffat, 6.34. Chris
Yeah, we can
Red,
stop there. That's like halfway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I think yeah, let's talk about those and then sure.
let's talk about the top.
Okay.
And I also just want to get your take, and also definitely get
Yeah.
a take of the chat on what it means to be like a 10-to-1 icon. Like, what is? Do you want to be one? You know, like, sometimes people look back so fondly with rose-colored glasses on their favorite cast members because maybe they didn't see it live, or they did see it live. It doesn't, I just think that spot is a tough spot to be in, but it also can be the most creative spot. So I feel like Will Forte gets thrown around in that conversation. I was like a huge fan of the Falconer. And I feel like I mean, I have to go back and check, but like that's like a big 10-to-1 energy for me. And so it's like, if you're into that type of like comedy, then maybe you gravitate towards that spot, and maybe you're just not going to fit into a political impression and be in the cold open, or have enough face recognition like Keenan to pop up in the monologue and like pal around with the host. So, and then and you have Aristotle, one season wonder, who's literally known for a 10-to-1, which I think everyone knows, save for me. Angelo. Yeah. So like literally, so if you look back on his, and it's just like it's too funny not to say Aristotle's 15 minutes of fame, because he was on SNL for 15 minutes and 38 seconds.
Oh wait, say that again. That is crazy. 15 minutes of fame. That is way too literal. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like, I hate to say it, but also it's too perfect not to say. But so out of that 15 minutes and 38 seconds of Aristotle's time as a cast member on SNL, 3 minutes and 42 seconds of it was appearing in 10-to-1s, which also includes Angelo and the mail-in testing one, his debut episode, which was with Sarah's debut as well, and briefly in the Kim Kardashian Skims 10-to-1. And then we have two people I really want to talk about with you, Nicole, and I want to hear the chat's again opinions on what it means to be a 10-to-1 king or queen, 10-to-1 icon, is Sarah and Andrew, which I feel like this is a case of the stats like telling the truest story, because they've definitely been in some pre-tapes that are memorable. Andrew with the graduation pre-tape last season with Natasha Lyonne, and then and last season's finale and the one before that with the prom picture, like things like that. Maybe Andrew might be known for, and Sarah with her weird pre-tapes like Meatballs and Chucky. But I feel like Andrew and Sarah are like big time, again, 10-to-1 energy. So what do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I have referenced that sketch many times on this podcast and on this podcast network at large, and I will not stop now. It was so good and so memorable and just so 10-to-1 in its spirit and its form. And yeah, I think that just the broader question that you brought up of, do you want to be a 10-to-1 icon? Just like we talked last season a lot about, do you want to be a Weekend Update star of who appears a lot? Like with Heidi, we talked about in 2 seasons ago, she was on Weekend Update so much, and she had so many memorable characters, a lot of recurring characters, a lot of fresh characters. And then we barely saw her after that at the desk, but she had a great season otherwise. So these things are interesting, and I think they also can be not necessarily fixed. So like being a 10-to-1 icon, though, I feel like is more of a like a personality trait perhaps than being a Weekend Update guest icon. I think it says so much about your style of humor and about the Will Forte of it all. I will be honest, and I think John is in the live chat, but he's not with us now, so he can't stop me from saying this. Sorry, John. But when I watched SNL when I was younger growing up, and then when I sort of watched it again more earnestly, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, when I really like could say that I was watching everything all the time and was really, really in it. And I was sort of going back. I realized that of everyone from that era, Will Forte was the one, if I was like, who I could rattle off like, 20 sketches someone had been in, like Will Forte was such a blind spot for me. I could not name, and again, now I can, but like when I was really getting into SNL again as an adult with like this type of knowledge that we have now about it with the stats and the like nitty gritty, like he was such a blind spot for me compared to his contemporaries. And I think it is because he was a 10-to-1 icon. And when the sketches from that era that were more imprinted for me were the cold opens, or were the things, I guess, that happened earlier in the night, maybe because I was younger, because those things had a wider reach. And when I say because I was younger, maybe I was up, I wasn't awake at 12:54 a.m., but I was awake at 11:47. So maybe that played a role in it. But things like that, I find interesting, like just the imprinting of my memories. He was so much less a part of what I had thought of that era than like really anybody else, which is wild. And he kind of overlaps eras. But I mean, yeah, actually, in both of the main eras, he overlapped, and I feel like he was a big blind spot. And so you kind of, I think the internet now changes things in terms of whether you want to be a 10-to-1. We should kind of turn that in like 10-to-1 con, like icon, something like that. We'll make that a term. But it's like, I feel like history sometimes forgets 10-to-1 icons, and the internet has helped that because sketches go viral on YouTube now more than they used to. I guess they've been going viral on YouTube for a decade plus now, but I think that like the Costco sketch from the Kim Kardashian episode that we referenced earlier, that one has taken on such a life of its own online that at this point, it doesn't matter that it didn't make the actual episode. And that was such a 10-to-1 in its spirit, even though it wasn't in the episode. So I do think, looking at this list, like his history forgets 10-to-1 icons sometimes. But with that said, I mean, at the top of this list, again, Aristotle, I think we have yet to see what else he will achieve outside of the show. So I do want to see what else he's going to do. But I mean, the other people at the top of this list, like Sarah and Andrew and Ego, like they are really imprinting for me. And they're people who I think are so memorable. So maybe it's part of like the age. Maybe if I had been a little older when Will Forte was making his mark, maybe he would have been the person who I remembered more and who I could have named every sketch he'd ever been in the way that I feel like I could for other people of his time. So all that's to say, I just feel like the historical nature of all this is like analyzing it from the past, like in Hamilton, when you just think of the legacy of something, I think that plays an interesting role in 10-to-1s. But yeah, Sarah and Andrew are like that Mail and Poop sketch was so memorable for me. And then we got another great 10-to-1 from Sarah last night, and I feel like, or this week, and I think that's like her sweet spot, but I also don't want her to be pigeonholed into it because I think it's cool to see her elsewhere, like at the desk with Colin Jost. It's like, I feel like that was such a revelation and everyone loved it. So, I want, again, how high do you want this to be? I feel like you want to be kind of in the middle of this list.
Yeah, I mean, I shy away from volume stats a lot on the show. I mean, that's the whole reason the power ranking was invented, is because otherwise, it's just us looking at it purely from one thing. That's why I did percentage and not like gross time, because otherwise it would just be like Keenan and whoever appears the most, 80, Kate. Whereas, yeah, this might be a stat to highlight Aristotle, Sarah, Andrew, people like that. But it just like, shows usage in the show. And that's what we do on this show, talk about numbers and what they tell us. So yeah, as far as Ego too, I mean, I was kind of surprised to see her up there because she kind of gets put in everything. But she was in 6 of the last 9 10-to-1 sketches, including the 2 this season of the Eyes one and the Caribbean Queens one. Baby Monitor and, the Don't Stop Believin' Bowen sketch, things like that. Then 911 Call with Simu Liu and the Pastor sketch with Jonathan Majors. So she like does have big roles in them. And that's what I thought this stat would highlight, is just like not only appearing in them, I did throw on the screen for the video listeners as well the number of appearances, but just like if you're getting a lot of time in them, you're probably the lead in them. So that's what I wanted to show is like the Angelos or the googly eyes, those type of sketches that like you are the lead in. So I feel like that definitely shows up here, tells a story. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Who do you want to talk about tonight, Nicole?
So that's actually a perfect segue into the person that I'm going to talk about. And this, by the way, is our segment where we highlight one person each, sometimes, X number of people each, but we will call it one person each. And this is someone who, whether we think they had an amazing week, whether we wish they had a better week, whether we want to unpack why they were in the middle of the pack, any reason it is not because they were the best or the worst or any sort of like, qualifier like that or subjective to anything. It's just something who we're like, we want to talk about this person from a data perspective, and we're curious, and we think that the other person who we're talking to, that I think Mike will be curious about it. Mike thinks I will. And then, of course, we think everyone in the chat and everybody listening will as well. So I am going to talk about Sarah. And I think that she had such an interesting episode to talk about. And also today, where we do this every Wednesday, so we're live right now Wednesday, and the mid-week promo just dropped today of Sarah and Meg Thee Stallion, and I feel like that was just great timing off of her eyeball sketch to have this other very graphic promo come out. So I think she has a lot of momentum, and that's exciting to me. So about her screen time last week, I think let me pull this up. I'm gonna pull up some numbers as I talk. So yeah, Sarah had a really good week. I mean, if you look at like just the pure screen time, of the cast, she's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She's 7th. And the only people above her are people who have been there longer than her, who have like, I feel like been there longer and taken more time to find where they work on the show. And I just think something about Sarah is she has been for someone who I think it could be so easy to pigeonhole her and say, oh, she's a 10-to-1 person. Oh, she's just going to do her, graphic stuff or her body horror stuff, as it's called. I think for someone who is it feels so easy to do, oh, she's the girl on SNL who does that stuff. And that's her role and her place. And there are people throughout history who are amazing cast members, but who really are just known for their one thing, whatever it is, whether they're just a master impressionist or they just do like, 1 or 2 impressions that become a big hit, or they just anything that it is, or they do, I would say like master impressionist or like 10-to-1 quirky people, or I'd even throw in like update anchors who are cast members into that. Someone who's just really known for being great at the desk, but leaves something to be desired with like, how would they do, in sketches more. And I think what's fascinating with Sarah, my main sort of point is she's someone who can be she's so good at something so specific that no one else on the show could be half as good at as her. Although I feel like Molly maybe will come close, and I want to see Molly come close.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question about Sarah.
Yeah,
since you brought her up. Is there anything that you haven't seen from her yet that you want to, or things that you've seen a little bit of that you would like to see more?
Great question. Yes, very specifically, I want to see her Bernie Sanders impression on the show. Very specific answer. It's almost like we planned it, which we did not at all. That was very on the fly. But yes, I absolutely do. I saw Sarah's show live, and afterwards I talked to her, and I said, she did her Bernie Sanders impression, a little bit of it during the show, and I said, that was amazing. I really hope that makes it to SNL. And she said, I hope so too. So I don't know that Bernie's making the headlines that he did, last year, a few years ago. But come on, Bernie, make some headlines, and then Sarah will do an impression. So very specific answer, but in general, I think that I want to see her kind of have a role in news-driven sketches or pop culture-driven sketches, and do something where, whether she's doing an impression of someone specific or she's just doing character work, kind of satirizing something in culture and of the moment, I feel like that is something I would love to see from her. But honestly, also on the flip side of that, I think everything she brings to the show is so refreshing because it's not about that. It's more whether it's like slice of life and absurdist at the same time, and like, you know, an office sketch that's about having your eyeballs replaced. Like that intersection is so cool, and it is refreshing, and it kind of takes you out of the news or out of the pop culture stories that are, you know, sometimes all consuming for no reason. So I mean, I love that stupid stuff. It's a big part of my you know, what I think about is all these dumb stories. So as much as she's so refreshing the way she is, I think that'd be really cool to see her a little bit in more of that stuff. What about you?
Yeah, I was just curious if you like are excited to see her play straight roles sometimes, like, you know, to be an 80 or a Cecily, you know, not replacement, but just someone that needs to be plugged in and play a little girl or an old lady in a sketch and be surrounded by, you know, crazy people instead of being the crazy person. Because that's kind of, you know, I mean, this is a cast member that I'm a big fan of, but like at the same time, I understand criticism as like Leslie Jones. Like Leslie does like something so well, but you're also like, oh, like sometimes had a harder time or like didn't come through or didn't get cast as much and like playing a straight role. But like I'm actually like I just like to see Sarah pop up in like a normal outfit and just do something because I'm like, yeah, like she doesn't have to just have like something crazy going on with her body, but and I'm looking at her big appearances, and like we did a stat a while ago. I pulled one together that was like quality appearances rather than just like gross appearances. Gross appearances is also something that Sarah does a lot.
That's a great one.
Thank you.
Yeah, so true.
Is like she when she does appear, she appears for a long time. So it's like, you know, sometimes I'll do average time per appearance, which, you know, kind of unfairly, you know, uh, puts the people who do voice work, you know, into a bad category or things like that. But like, you know, I'm looking at her biggest appearance to date is the mail-in testing service, 10 to 1 we mentioned. Her second biggest appearance was the googly eyes one on Saturday. And then you know, we have her three update spots are all about 3 minutes or more. And then the meatballs one is about 3 minutes. And then the spring flowers sketch with Jake Gyllenhaal. So that's her biggest
Right.
appearances, and so I just want to point that out from a stat point of view with Sarah is that I think she's in a good place for a second year cast member because you want to be the star no matter where it is. So we're talking about 10 to 1 icons or people who do political impressions is like if you're the star of your sketch, you're gonna find your audience. I think pretty easily, especially in this day and age where there's something out there for everybody. So great pick. She had a great week. I'm excited to see if she does rise in the power rankings, maybe above all else, because last year I think she picked up a lot of steam and kind of just like stayed very bottom statistically last year and like finished below Pete Davidson, and I think we were like, how is that possible? But just like again, late night sketches, few and far between, but when she does, you know, she's a star. So good pick.
Thank you. One more note on her is again, last season there were so many times where our MVP poll, I need to say, Sarah was number one in our MVP poll last year. On we do polls on Instagram and Twitter every week, and she got number one more than anyone else, more than double the times anyone else did. She performed unbelievably well on the MVP polls. It was amazing to see. I, as a big fan of hers, I love to see that. But her screen time was so, you know, she was very much like at the bottom of the pack. And I think that's fascinating because it's like to do so much with, I mean, for a first year cast member, being on the board at all is awesome. But just the way that she maximized that and was so memorable every single time, I think that's an amazing stat to be like, well, her screen time and her power rankings were low, but she left a mark proportionately. You know, if you kind of do like a screen time per MVP, you know, or take a ratio there, it's like she made like 40 times the impression that someone else did if you take the amount of screen time other people got who weren't leaving that mark week to week. So I just think that's such a cool stat to contrast, and
Yeah, and
I'm excited for her going forward.
we're actually going to do a quick stat or award later when we end the show in a bit. But yeah, I totally agree. I think it's better to be polarizing and pop up and be memorable, for sure. I mean, John said last week, like, we don't talk enough about Mikey Day. So, like, that was John's pick, and we talked about Mikey Day. And I think it's because the Mikeys and the Keenans, and then, of course, like Kate, 80 Cecily, or even Pete, people are, like, naturally going to like newer and fresher things. So, right now, that's Sarah for sure. And I think there's Mukes. But I'm going to move on my pick. Excited to pick this person just because you just never know. I mean, we did a preseason show last year looking at the new cast and all that. And with this person, I'm picking Marcelo, and I was like stoked to see twice in a row rookie on update. I can look back to see any precedent on that, but couldn't find much. But I was looking at the first time a rookie gets a lead, and I mean, I feel like historically, unless it's a big cast shift like Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, or even like the middle players with like Chris Farley, Schneider, all like and David Spade, like those like different era shifts, like SNL has not been too kind to rookies. And so I think we talked about enough about Michael Longfellow on our other shows last week that we didn't feel a need to talk too much about him on By the Numbers. So I want to talk about Marcelo because it might be, if you're a rookie, you might go, oh, Michael Longfellow got the spot episode 1. It's going to be tough for me to get it right away because, Cecily's going to come back, or, people like Punky have been waiting with material to do update and other stand-ups. And then to see Marcelo go up there and I was like, I really liked his spot, and I thought he was awesome. I liked his voice too a lot. Like Michael Longfellow got a lot of pub on his voice. And also, like, these, not a connection, but I like to make connections, as like shout out to SNL's birthday in 1975. And George Carlin's first monologue was about baseball. So yeah.
Good
Which is,
connection.
which is a bit that, he did. It's on his comedy album, baseball and basketball. But I was thinking, like, Lauren Holt, like, only got one lead her whole season, and that was her update spot. So, SNL gives, SNL takes away, but that took a while for her to get there. Punky really only got, like, when I do my weighted appearances, I think it was just strolling to the polls on the Mulaney episode was like really, and that's like a little generous of a lead. It's kind of an ensemble with Ego and Keenan and stuff. And then you look at Sarah and Aristotle, who both debuted an update together, separate segments, but on the same show in the Majors Taylor Swift episode with, Laugh and Tosh and Sarah as herself. Angela was before that in the 10-1, but and also like Molly got their first lead in this episode. So like right away, I'm seeing more, Devin Walker. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him get his first lead, just like get that off his back, because I don't know, maybe SNL is being a little more kinder in its old age and not being so hard on the rookies, because I'm sure to get that burden off your back and feel part of the team in any job you do is like huge. So that's why I want to bring up Marcelo. And yeah, what do you think, Nicole? What stands out for you?
Well, first of all, that's a brilliant metaphor, or it's not a metaphor because it is literal, but just the idea that you want to contribute to your team at any job and get that off your back, that first moment. I feel like everyone can relate to that, of like when you do, one task at work, or you do one big thing that's really helpful to everyone else around you, or that makes you a big asset. It's like, phew, you can kind of breathe. And I think SNL is the extreme case of that. But I think any team, any type of job, anything, sports team, anything, that's true. It's just this like you need that one moment, and then everything is a little easier from there. So yeah, I really hope that we see Devin get that, because the rookies, they're not wasting time on getting those lead roles, and he's our last one who needs one. So I hope to see that as well. But he's been fitting in really well. I think he's becoming kind of a utility player in a way that whenever he's just in a sketch, like in the cold open this past week with the iron, bit, I feel like he really blended in perfectly. It was great. But, back to Marcelo, he was amazing. Like I truly was like in awe. Again, the baseball, I've suddenly been kind of aware of what's going on with baseball because I know it's a big moment right now. So I have no choice but to be kind of paying attention. And it's like it just felt so timely and fresh, except I know that his sort of comedy around accents, it's something that he has done a lot of work on his TikTok. You can see that. So it felt like he took something very of the moment, with baseball being in its whatever the term is these days, playoffs, finals, championships. What is it?
World Series
baseball?
playoffs.
World Series playoffs. Thank you. Yeah,
Well, I mean, World Series is the end, but MLB playoffs.
Right. MLB playoffs. There we go. I don't watch any of it, but it's like he took something so timely and he mixed it with something that he has talked about so much in his comedy. And I just think that's perfect. Like when you can take your own voice and take something you've worked on and practiced. I mean, all of the ways that he was, adjusting how he was talking and which accents he was using and flowing so naturally back and forth. It was so skilled, and you can tell that was a skill that he had worked on for a long time and then put it into a current moment. Another moment I want to bring up that I thought was so impressive, there was one moment where he kind of after he did one bit where he was kind of being very physical, going like this, he paused, and I think he paused for a laugh, and he thought he would get a laugh, and I was surprised he didn't get a laugh. I thought it totally deserved one, and it seemed like the moment that would. But then he from my perspective, I thought he paused for a laugh, and then he didn't. He just kept going. He was like, "Oh, nobody's laughing. I'm going to keep going," and that was great. And I just feel like from the data, like when all eyes are on you on Weekend Update, and it is just your face on the screen, getting that screen time, like there's so much room because you're playing off of yourself or off of Colin and Shay, but there's so much room to like play for laughs and then have to like time it right and things like that. And with the data, like Weekend Update, if you're on Weekend Update, you're in the top. I feel like it's very hard to have a Weekend Update spot and not be in the top, like, what would you say? I guess the top half of the screen time. Is he in the top half? He's pretty low, I guess, for
sure.
usual.
I mean, average update spot is like between 240 and 315. So he was right in there.
Right, but just in general for the full a full episode of screen time, if you're on Weekend Update, you're having a good episode when all is considered. So yeah, he was great, and I think just he used his screen time so well, and he owned the camera, and I think he commanded that. And yeah, I'm curious how he's gonna play when he gets like 32 seconds in a sketch and he has to play for laughs, but then keep on reflecting back and forth to other people in the sketch and then go back and forth, like how that will play, because we haven't seen that from him. But
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
upside is we're seeing Molly, Marcelo, and Michael Longfellow. Yeah, we got 3 mics in the cast right now, so I gotta say the full name. Is to see them play themselves. I mean, that's like, again, I mean, I don't know if it's more pressure to like introduce yourself. I mean, I know Molly played a fictionalized version of themselves on in that sketch, but I think it's pretty like maybe, like I said, I think that's my take on just talking about rookies. And as we go on to the season, we won't mention them as much because they'll have been there, and we'll have more to talk about from a data perspective. But like we haven't never seen, like, I mean, briefly in the Selena Gomez monologue, but like we never really seen like JAJ come out and be himself. I feel like we didn't see Beck Bennett do that a lot. Like these seasoned sketch players like fall into roles like Ego, Bowen. They've done it before, but like they're not known for that. They're great character actors. So for SNL hiring these young cast members, come from a stand-up background, coming out, being yourself, and saying like, having Colin Jost be like Marcelo Hernandez, and you get to like, slide in the chair is like, all right, SNL fans, like, here's who I am. So I think that's pretty interesting because, Sarah did get that last season, and I think she'll continue to do so. But, and I do want to see Molly and Marcelo be in sketches though. And I don't know if anyone mentioned this, but when they came out and did the Gritty and the Manning cast, I thought it was like really funny. They were in the outfits they were like debuted on social media as cast members in. I thought that was kind of funny. It was almost like Bart Simpson in the same outfit every time. Like, here's Marcelo and Molly, and like this is the only way you know them is from that one social media post. Like, here they are. So that was kind of funny to see them like that. But let's move on to our patron rankings, and we'll wrap up.
Perfect. Okay, and I totally agree with that. That's a good point. Okay, so first, do you want to present it as what did you frame it as?
The patron rankings?
An award? I
was just thinking of
Impact Player of the Week.
Yeah, Impact Player, because that's what we try to measure here is like, now that, especially that we're week-to-week show on By the Numbers, is like, who do we want to talk about? What are we doing? What are we talking about numbers-wise, power ranking, screen time, all these advanced analytics. And with the patron rankings we're doing every week, we have our patrons rank the cast just to kind of get an idea over the season at large, like how we're feeling as like, our patrons are like some of the most diehard, awesome SNL fans in the universe. So I respect their opinion as a separate metric that is based on opinion and not just like empirical data. So, and it's clearly this week, the Impact Player of the Week is Sarah, because she was 11th statistically, and for the like opinion, like the fan vote, she was first, and like an easy first. So it was, interestingly enough, the two cast members that Nicole and I picked, Sarah and Marcelo, both above an 8 in our patron ranking. Any comments on this, Nicole?
Yeah, so I'm going to contrast this with our social media audience polling. So basically, we're talking about, this is our patrons, and of course, you can always join the Saturday Night Network Patreon, patreon.com/the SNL Network. Join, so many fun perks, and this is one of them. You get to vote week to week on, where you would rank the cast members, but week to week, and then we kind of infuse that as data, as arguably empirical data, if you will. And we treat that kind of as its own metric. So it's really fun anyways, just plug for the Patreon. But so yeah, what's really interesting with this is, so this is just our patrons, and then our social media audience is just on Instagram and on Twitter. So we have people, you can vote both, one per person per platform, and then that audience had Marcelo first and Sarah second. So a little bit of a switch there, but pretty much very comparable in terms of where all of these people were ranked. And that's just, we have people say their MVP singular of the week, and then we pull the top 5 to talk about. Whereas this, we have our patrons rank every single person. So the numbers there are different because we're having people just rank who their number 1 is, whereas here everyone is ranked by everyone. So yeah, the top is very similar to the MVP poll top. Not a great week for the Johnsons, unfortunately. James Austin Johnson and Punky Johnson are second to last and last, respectively, which there are some dirty jokes to be made there, and I'll leave it at that. But it is, bad week for the Johnsons. And then, any other comments you want to make here? In the meantime, Mike is analyzing something, doing something interesting. So let me think something else. Molly is actually, it's pretty much, it's the same. So our MVP poll, and something else that's different is we incorporate the host. So the host is often in the top 5. It is often in, say, second, third, fourth. That's pretty common. And so the top 4 here were also in the top 5 for our MVP poll, which is super interesting.
Yeah, my only comment I was checking with is Sarah, Marcelo, Andrew, and Molly. So like, if SNL needs some feedback from the diehards And I know that we don't represent everybody in the world, but the diehards don't. If we want to move the needle of the show, look here is that's all rookies and sophomores of the show. So people are excited to see new faces and new takes, some new people on the show. So I like that's what stood out to me. Want to wrap up and do some listener questions and call it a night?
Sounds perfect.
All right, so I got some great questions. Some I want to save till I get a bigger sample size because I think it'll be more interesting data-wise. So everybody, that wants some questions, it definitely helps out our show, much like the live chat does, just because, maybe my favorite thing about this show and also the hardest thing about this show is that we can literally look at so many things from a stats point of view. And sometimes I'll spend 2 hours on a stat and I'll go, you know what? It wasn't interesting. So I had to move on to the next stat. So getting ideas for stats is always really exciting because it means I have a new little project and then I go find and we talk about it and sometimes we come to unreal conclusions that I never would have thought. So first question came from Twitter and is, if this season continues to move away from politics, which cast members' airtime do you think will suffer most, and which cast members' airtime do you think will benefit most? So, Nicole, I think you should answer that one first.
That is a great question. So which cast
Really good
members
question.
will, yeah, damn. So which cast members will, okay. I mean, the obvious answer to talk about is someone who just left the show. Kate McKinnon was, I mean, she did everything, but I think of every kooky character, she did everything. What I will remember most fondly for Kate always will be her political impressions. I think no one has ever in the history of political impressions infused so much empathy and compassion into them. I feel like she captured the emotion, even in despicable people. She found their emotion and captured that. And so no one will ever be better than Kate in my eyes for things like that. But anyway, who will suffer the most to me would be JAJ. I mean, again, his best episode was his first episode on the show ever. And he played, the former president in a cold open. And that was the bulk of it. And then he made his splash by flip-flopping, Trump, Biden. And that's what he's become known for. He's so talented otherwise, but I think there's no question that he would suffer the most. And then who would rise? Definitely Sarah. Like what I was saying, she doesn't really do a lot of the political impressions or even I would say the pop culture moment stuff. But then again, I feel like any cold open content is not as much something that we'd see Sarah in, whether it's political or not, because I think there is definitely a overlap with the political content and the pop culture of the news trending content. And Bowen, I feel like is good at kind of being a part of both of those categories. I think there's overlap. So Sarah, I think whether it's political or pop cultural, I think she wouldn't be. I think it's not so different, but I think she would probably benefit if it became less political. And then I'll just shout out those two.
Yeah, I mean, the clear answer is JAJ for obvious reasons. Playing the current and former president with a high degree of regularity in his time on SNL. So we're gonna, like I said earlier in the show, we got a midterm coming up. I mean, I think the November shows are gonna be right after it. We got one more show. I mean, we got a show this week. I don't know how political it will be, but then we have a week off, and then it's definitely going to be a political show at the very beginning of November. So the clear answer is JJ. Also, shout out to Ken who gave us a question. And also I'd ask Ken is what do you define as less political? Because these two cold opens weren't so political. They always are topical, that's for sure. But we had Trump appear in the cold open as JJ playing him, and we had the actual clip of Biden in this past one. But I'll definitely agree that it's less political than say season 46 when it's not a midterm and it's an election year for president. So that's for sure. So we'll in 2 years in 2024 we're gonna see it's gonna be the JJ show for sure. And I I'm not excited for that, but I'm also excited for him for that because I'm a fan of his.
The way the 50th anniversary and the election year are gonna overlap and be, that's gonna be bizarre vibes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and people have said before, it's like, having, Dana Carvey play Ross Perot and George H.W. Bush. Like, are they going to, try to pull that off with even more modern technology to have JJ play too? I mean, that's assuming that Biden or Trump will be the nominee, but I mean, they're definitely going to stay in the news for a bit. So I would say Bowen would benefit the most from a less political show, just because I don't think that's really his lane. I think it was interesting to see him play a game show host in this one, just because I don't know, he has so much charisma and good energy in a sketch that like he can definitely lead one. We talked about Chloe Fineman playing Brittany in those cold opens last year. With the what was it, the Reggae Jean Page one, and like episodes like that where I guess that's going back a little bit now, but episodes like that look where I definitely are not political, but they can bring on political guests, like having Pete walk on as Matt Gaetz and things like that, or having, so I think our Cecily comes on as a Republican, politician like thing. So, I think that's a happy medium. So the show being political or not is they'll infuse it in a good way in the cold open, and of course we can update. It's a free for all for politics. So I think it's definitely Bowen, and if Ken and others are considering this season to be less political, clearly Bowen is benefiting stat wise. So let's move on to our last question, because it's going to lead to next week, and we'll wrap up. Is just a question about any implication or stats on who introduces double duty hosts, which I think is a pretty niche SNL lore thing, but like I'm all about that kind of stuff. So interesting to look at. Looked back at double duty hosts and looked at 66 different musical performances. Obviously, most of the time it's twice a show that they, the musical performance. And out of those, 41 were introduced by a cast member. So it's pretty routine that does happen. We've seen in recent times family members like Nick Jonas had Kevin Jonas introduce him. Lizzo had her mom. Billie Eilish had both her parents. So things like that, like we saw, which was like, very cute and very like post-COVID, warm and fuzzy. So I think like that's like definitely a implication of that era, especially like young performers like Billie Eilish or Lizzo, Nick Jonas, people like that are kind of like having a big moment on SNL. So as far as predictions, I mean, that's my stat on that. And it was fun to look back at all those. I mean, also, I love looking back at old SNL for stats, but the show has evolved so much, and like what is like really an introduction. So I didn't include ones that had like, camera one goes on and it's Ray Charles and then he starts playing the piano, like he's talking first. So I consider this to be the traditional like camera two is on somebody and they say, ladies and gentlemen, something, like where Mick Jagger introduced himself in that way. Like the camera just went to Mick Jagger and then he walked over and performed with Jeff Beck, or, Justin Timberlake, Chance the Rapper, like they introduced themselves and then Lizzo did. So I consider those as intros. And so, yeah, 41 out of 66 were by a cast member, and the rest were guests or the hosts themselves. So, yeah, any predictions as we wrap up, Nicole? Either implications of a cast member, like, do you think it's seniority, like a Keenan or a Kate? Kate also introduced the other Billie Eilish last year. Chris and Keenan intro the other Nick Jonas. So do you think it's kind of like a nod of respect, like they're out the door, or maybe it has to do with their relationship with the host? We had the three women of SNL introduce Harry Styles, which is, very cool, with Kate 80 Cecily with the Styles episode. So yeah, what do you think it has any implication? And then wrap up by who's your pick? Who's going to introduce Megan Thee Stallion at least once this week?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think the Billie Eilish episode with Kate, it was just, that one felt so obvious because it was Kate's big return. She had a ton of screen time. We did some you crunched some numbers that we talked about of like the duos, and like Kate and Billy as a duo that night were all over the place. So it felt really nice and wholesome. And there's like, I think everybody, even if, whatever you feel about Kate's tenure on the show, she was such a star that night, and it was excited to celebrate her. It felt like just such a celebration of Kate in addition to Billy and all the other cast members. So that felt obvious. I see Eric in the chat, and I was going to say the same thing. Naked Sarah from the promo introduces Meg, and I think that maybe it just has to be it. SNL has been a little edgier lately than it has in recent years, and I think if they have the technology to blur Sarah's whole body in the promo, who says they can't do it during a live show? So, I mean, do I think it's possible? 100%. I think it would be really innovative and cool. I have certainly never seen something like that on live TV before. The amount of risks involved are astronomical, but I think there's a lot of legal issues. I think that if something went wrong, if things 1 second glitched, I think that the show could get sued. Absolutely. But I think it could be cool, to have a blurred out naked person introduce Meg. That'd be great. So I wouldn't rule Sarah out. I feel like something that's been missing that we're going to talk about is rap videos. Of course, we haven't had rap videos this year, and so that leads me to feel like Ego could have a big episode. She and Meg did a rap together when Meg was musical guest 2 years ago for the premiere of 46. And so I feel like they could do something like that again. And I hope it's a big night for Ego, and I could see her introducing Meg for sure. And then also I could see Bowen. They have a movie together coming out soon-ish. And so that could be cool. I'll put those three in the ring: Sarah, Ego, and Bowen. What about you?
Sounds good. And I would say from a stat perspective, if you want to host SNL, your best chance is probably befriend a double duty host and introduce them, because we had Zoe Kravitz and Daniel Kaluuya both intro a double duty host, and then host themselves later. So if there's any merit to that, we had Zoe Kravitz introduce Donald Glover, Childish Gambino, and Daniel Kaluuya introduce the other performance right there, and then they both became future SNL hosts. And yeah, seeing some of the pairings are pretty funny. I mean, we looked at some stats on host and musical guest age gaps, and found that Brendan Gleeson and Willow were the third biggest gap of all host and musical guests, and like some of the pairings are pretty funny. So seeing like that, like Larry David introduce Ariana Grande and Hillary Clinton introduced Miley Cyrus, Taron Killam introduced Blake Shelton, like Whoopi Goldberg introduced Justin Bieber, Tom Hanks and Bruno Mars, like some of those, like, so if that's my guess as a default, is if there's a guest in the building, which I feel like SNL also tries to be a little lighter on double duty hosts, especially their first time. They might lean on some friends of the show to pop in. So if it's not a family member, I would guess it would be that. So kind of like if John Hamm, who was in the cold open last week, if he was in this cold open, I'd be like, oh, John Hamm will definitely do it. Someone like that. But yeah, I would have said Ego just because she worked with her in the Bottom of Your Face rap, which was with Pete, Chris, and Keenan. So I guess if I was to pick a cast member, I'd pick her. But yeah, always exciting. Those little tiny SNL lore is like, those kind of things, because I think double duty hosts are like on the rise, and like we've seen a bunch lately, and multiple a season. So I really think we'll have opportunities to see that, and it's like just kind of fun. But yeah, we'll wrap up with that. And what are you hoping to see with Meg this week?
I'm hoping, again, I want a more musical episode. I think that John talks a lot about this, and I disagree that he or I don't disagree, but we had a very musical theater energy era, and perhaps that is fading away. All four of the new hires are stand-ups, not a lot of musical backgrounds, not like musical comedy people per se. So I do think we're moving into more of like edgy risky, daring, like that more different kind of vibe, and it's not as much of like a theater kid, kind of thing. Although when Cecily comes back, I think we'll get more of that. But I miss that. We haven't had like musical sketches, and for me, fusing those in more makes the show. It changes the tone of the show, and it gives it, because of course musical performances exist as part of the show. But I think when you infuse music into the sketches of the show, it just makes that hour and a half like totally different when that's part of it. And so I think that I'd love to see some pre-tapes that are musical, because I don't want Meg to like, strain her voice when she also has musical performances to focus on that night. So I'm hoping we see at least one incredible rap pre-tape. And I'm very curious to see who's a part of it, because a lot of our people who usually are not on the show anymore, Pete and Chris, dominated rap pre-tapes last year. And so we'll see, we'll see if any of the rookies have some chops there, but that's a big hole that I think I want to see filled. I miss that, and I think Meg will deliver. So that's my main thing. I'm excited to see her. She has so much charisma and charm, and I'm curious to see her like land hard jokes too. I think she's so good at entertaining, and I want to see her like crack jokes, and be really like, yeah. And I want to see how she fuses into this new era. I'm really curious, because I think she fit in great when she was a musical guest, 2 years ago, and so that felt like a whole different show. So we'll see how she fares this time.
Yeah, I'd like to see her work with Please Don't Destroy. We didn't talk about them tonight. We'll talk about them some other episode as they pop in and out. But also Megan Thee Stallion, she's a young host with a young cast. So to your point about who she could work with. But yeah, I mean, I loved what they did with. I loved the Lizzo musical pre-tape they did with she did with Please Don't Destroy last year, and I also loved Zoe Kravitz Finding the Cat pre-tape with PDD last year. So I think it's a great way to someone who's a double duty host. I feel like you don't become a double duty host unless you have kind of a known persona, because otherwise, like, why would you be doing that? Either like you're a musical artist or you're an actor. But if you're doing both, then maybe that means that your personality is large enough that like it can warrant that, or you're popular enough that it's wanted, either by NBC or by the fans, when they post about it, ask who do you want to see, like a Harry Styles or a Billie Eilish, like Taylor Swift back in the day, like people like that. Like, doesn't matter if they have a personality; it's just because they're so popular. So Megan Thee Stallion might fall in the middle of that. But I think we're going to see her play herself pretty often.
Oh yeah.
Again, SNL will give her a crutch and say, your personality is great, so just be you, which I think was Lizzo a lot. I think that worked out a lot for Lizzo. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I feel like every double duty, it's because how can you focus on so many different things? I feel like you have to be yourself for half of it at least. And so yeah, and then the ones that like Ariana Grande, when she did the title sketch, and she did like 6 or 7 different musical impressions in one sketch. That is being so many people. That's amazing. But I just want to. I feel like she just knows how to put on a fun show and bring some levity. And I think this season has been mostly that, and I'm curious to see that trend continue for a 3rd episode in a row. And yeah, so also with double duty, we're going to continue to talk about that in the coming weeks, for our next show, and we'll keep on analyzing, keep on discussing. So yeah, anything else you want to mention while we're here?
No, let's call it. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. These are always fun. They always take different turns. So, Mike, you wanna plug anything?
Just check out SNL. It's a good show. 11:30 Saturday, this Saturday, and our show every Wednesday 8:30. We have some guests coming up that I'm excited about working with. So yeah, those 2 things. Hit me up at SNL Mike Murray on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. I'm back now from SNL hibernation, so let's get it.
I really, really hope for any listener's sake that if they have made it this far, that they have watched SNL. Because if you are here and you are not an SNL fan, then kudos to you, because that would be very cool. I'm curious what your context would be for all of what we're saying, and if it's still interesting.
Still got to promote the brand, though. We got to keep people interested.
Oh yeah.
That's our bottom line here.
Bottom line. Yep. So
what about you,
can
Nicole?
follow me.
Before we say goodbye.
Me personally, yeah. So no parting words. You can just follow me at Nicole Rovine anywhere, everywhere, and then of course follow at the SNL Network everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you give the video a thumbs up. Make sure you click subscribe. Leave a comment. Say something. You could leave like a statistics emoji if you just search statistics. There are 3 emojis that are really fun, so you could just put one in the comments on YouTube if you're here and listening. And subscribe. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. Just press the buttons. Any buttons always helps us. We really appreciate it. And keep following along. We have so much coverage ahead. I feel like, have done so much this season, and we have so much more to go. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.